Hello everybody, this is Jaime and welcome to my book review of 2024. Okay, just a little disclaimer, I was not able to read as much as last year due to school. So as a little joke, I'm going to include the books that I read this year in school. First off, clinical immunology and serology. Yes, I have a blur thing on my background, so just go with it, okay? Nobody gives a flip about this book. Or diagnostic microbiology. Modern blood banking. I love blood bank, so I like this book. Clinical hematology and the fundamentals of hemostasis. Urine analysis and body fluids. This is digestible, okay? It's okay. Yes, you could see my highlights. So yes, I did read these books. Last but not least, clinical chemistry. If you know me, I have a bachelor's in chemistry, and this is exactly why I wanted to go more into like the medical field. But overall, the course, 0 out of 10. So now into the actual books that I read this year. I don't have a particular order, but there is one that I did want to start with because I was reading it towards the end of last year and I could not fit it into my book review of 2023. So that book is Lightbringer by Pierce Brown. I'd like to have a disclaimer. I'm not gonna be telling any spoilers. Maybe I'll make another separate video talking about more in depth of the Red Rising series, but at this point in time, I moved, I started a new job, I am trying to get my shiat together. If you know from last year, my book of the year was Morning Star by Pierce Brown. This is still in the installment of the Red Rising series. This is actually the 6th book. I'm hoping and praying to God, Pierce Brown, I know you're not watching this, but listen, I want Red God to be a part of my book review of 2025. So please, I need Red God so bad. I have my notes over here, so if I'm glancing, I apologize. Things run together when you're reading so much. Lightbringer by Pierce Brown is the 5th book of the Red Rising series. It continues talking about Darrow of Lycos, and who is a former Red who is going through the ranks of society and trying to become a leader to fight against the Golds, which are the oppressive gods pretty much of a society. If you start the Red Rising series, the first 3 books are kind of more battle focused, more about action. It is a huge thrill ride on the first 3 books, but I believe the last 3 books are way more focused on military strategy and politics. And yes, I'm not a fan of politics, but Pierce Brown makes it to where it's so digestible and you feel for these characters because they start to get to the moral and ethical dilemmas that you face when going to war and starting a rebellion that needs to happen. How even the best intentions that you have for your family and your friends and people around you, what kind of unforeseen consequences you will face, or Darrow will face in this book. It brings back very familiar characters, but Lightbringer really does focus on the meaning of sacrifice, the meaning of identity, and really the harsh realities of war. It is a very emotional book. I cried for like 2 weeks. Ask my boyfriend. I was absolutely torn up. I will never forget sitting in my car crying. I called my friend Trey. Shout out Trey for recommending me this series because it is the best series I have ever read. And yes, I have read Twilight, but this tops Twilight. This tops anything. So I'm going to cut short on this. Of course, Lightbringer by Pierce Brown. 5 out of 5. Next book that I read is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. No, I do not have the book. And I don't mean for it to kind of be spoilers, but if I don't really have the book, it doesn't mean that I hated the book. I just didn't love it enough to put it in my physical library. I read my books off of Libby, and if I really do enjoy it, I buy it physical off of thrift books because I want my library to reflect the kind of books that I really love reading. So 11/22/63 by Stephen King. It is a historical thriller with a little bit of time travel, not even a little bit. It has time travel in it. If you recognize the date, 11/22/1963 is the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So Stephen King did a lot of research on the assassination of JFK, what really led up to it. He really dived into the world of Lee Harvey Oswald, so I respect the amount of research that he did. And this is a historical fiction. It is a time travel thriller about a high school teacher by the name of Jake Epping, who is tasked on a unique mission to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He's tasked by a local diner friend. His name is Al, and he reveals that there is a time portal in the back of his diner, and Al is dying from lung cancer, and he doesn't think that he'll be able to go through and live through the 1960s for very long enough to stop the assassination himself. So he asked Jake, please, can you go back and stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy, because our world would be so much better if he was not assassinated. It doesn't take him back to the exact date of 11/22/63. I think it actually takes him back to like 1960. So he has to live there for a couple years in the 1960s. And Stephen King really talks about whenever it comes to like, how do you get your money? How do you live? I guess what kind of occupation? You're just a random 30, 40-year-old guy that shows up. You have no history, no birth certificate. His parents haven't given birth to him yet. So it is absolutely insane. He does go into a lot of detail, and that's just who Stephen King is. But Jake really does dive into the 1960s and deals with the consequences of trying to change the past itself. Everybody knows that the past does not like to change. Literally, it seems like the past is trying to kill him. He is a pest. He is not supposed to be here. And here he is tampering with it, and it is not like that. He gets more deeply involved with the people around him and how that really kind of affects his mission of why he's even there. He really struggles with fate and should we even change the past? What's the moral dilemma? You know, the president of the United States who, you know, this great president was assassinated. Oh, if he just stayed alive, how great things would have been. So it really does blend in like suspense. There's some romance. You cannot have a Stephen King book without romance. And I will probably take all of my screenshots of things that Stephen King has said in the books that I have read that are just so out of pocket. Yes, new lingo, out of pocket. If you like history, you like conspiracy theories, and you like Stephen King, 11/22/63 will be the book for you. It was all right. Wasn't my favorite, so I'll give it a 3.45 out of 5. Next book that I read this year that I really enjoyed is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This was suggested to me by my boyfriend. Thank you, Christian. It was a wonderful book. It is a science fiction novel. It tells a story about a guy by the name of Charlie Gordon. He's a mentally disabled man in his 30s, and it is very sad. I really enjoyed how the author wrote the book. The book is written in kind of like diaries and like entries. Charlie is becoming more and more intellectual after he undergoes an experimental surgery designed to increase his intelligence. So at the very beginning of the book, he doesn't really use periods, he misspells things, but further on in the book, after he undergoes this intellectual surgery, he actually starts writing in full sentences using better vocabulary, a lot better vocabulary than me. It's pretty much written in progress reports, okay? As he becomes more intelligent, it comes with advantages and disadvantages. So advantages, he's learning different languages, he's understanding complex subjects, but he starts to realize that the people around him in his everyday life were treating him really badly, and he didn't know that at the time because he wasn't intellectually all there to understand that these people were talking down on him and talking bad about him and bullying him. He dealt with a lot of physiological turmoil, pretty much realizing that people were mocking him. What he thought were friends whenever he was mentally disabled were actually people that were terrible to him. Even though he is so intelligent, picks up languages, does all these things, even the most intellectual man is wrestling with the complexities of relationships and identity and the meaning of intelligence. As the story progresses, he realizes that the condition, this surgery that he underwent, is only temporary. Also on the cover, his name is Algernon. He also underwent this intellectual surgery. He becomes really emotionally attached to this mouse. He envied the mouse at the very beginning when he wasn't smart. He really wanted to be like the mouse because God, he was doing all these complex puzzles and he was going around doing these different things, and here he didn't even know how to spell certain things. After he undergoes the surgery, they're both becoming buddies, but he sees that Algernon is starting to become less and less intelligent and not being able to navigate the maze very well. And he notices that Algernon is getting really frustrated and really angry with himself, and he is wanting to run away. He's trying to hurt himself. And so Charlie starts looking inward and he's just like, oh gosh, like I won't be like this forever. And he starts kind of like lashing out himself. How terrifying is that? He faces the painful reality that he'll have to go back to what he was. This book really talks about human nature and the ethics of scientific experiments just like this, and what emotional cost it is to lose your intelligence. And Charlie really fluctuates between self-awareness and the eventual loss of his mental capacity pretty much. And so Flower to Algernon, I gave this book a 4 out of 5. It really does focus on the value of empathy and kindness and understanding. It's a wonderful book. So if you're wanting like a little short read, Flowers for Algernon, great book. Next on my book review, I'm not going to talk about this long because I honestly cannot remember what this book is really about. It is Misery by Stephen King. Never seen the movie. Everybody talks about the movie. It is pretty much a thriller, a psychological thriller, horror, whatever, about this guy named Paul Sheldon. See, I've blocked this from my brain because I really didn't enjoy it very much. Paul is a writer. He gets into a car accident on the side of the roads. A woman by the name of Annie Wilkes picks him up and rescues him, quote unquote, brings him to her house and starts nursing him. Annie is a very mentally unwell woman who turns out to be a murderous nurse. She has a borderline personality disorder where she can be super kind, but then she flips a switch and she becomes the most violent person ever. She has a lot of sinister intentions, and guess what? This guy named Paul Sheldon, she is his #1 fan. So great. She is obsessed with this character that he wrote about in his books by the name of Misery. She was really upset on how the book ended and kind of takes it out on Paul, saying like, how dare you write misery like this? She is such a wonderful woman. I love her so much. You better rewrite this whole book, or if you're not, I'm gonna torture you. That's pretty much the whole premise of the book. I just really didn't enjoy it, but it does talk about the relationship in between like creators and fans, obsession, things like that. It does get very gory, which I enjoy. I'm not put off by gore. I enjoy gore. So I think I gave it like a 2 or a 3 out of 5. I think I'm being very generous, but that is Misery. The next book that I read this year, dun, 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 I'm very, very proud that I read this book. So it is The Stand by Stephen King. I read this book, okay? Amazing. I have not seen this movie either, okay? But The Stand is probably my favorite Stephen King book that I've ever read. If you don't know what The Stand is, it is kind of like a post-apocalyptic thriller horror book about this global pandemic that kind of happens by the name of Captain Trips, which wipes out 99% of the world's population. It starts out when the flu is starting to spread, but things quickly roll. I mean, we've all went through the COVID pandemic. I really did compare it to the COVID pandemic. Things like shutting down, people aren't going to work, things like that, but people were dying all over. People were laying in the street dead. Like I said, I like gore. The survivors who are left are supposed to rebuild society. These societies are split into two pretty much. Didn't know that this book was going to take this turn, but I enjoyed it. One society really bases their ideas off of this woman named Mother Abigail. Another part of society that's being rebuilt, people are following this guy named Randall Flagg, who embodies chaos and evil. He is a very bad guy. And Mother Abigail over here is a 100-something-year-old woman who lives on a farm, and she loves God, she loves Jesus, and she pretty much is the kind, wise old lady. So they're showing up in people's dreams. So these people who are surviving this pandemic, they go to sleep, and a lot of times they'll have nightmares of Randall Flagg coming and finding them and torturing them, and then Mother Abigail will show up. And so people are either drawn one way or the other, and it's kind of like the God and the devil, okay? So people immediately are going towards Randall Flagg because he's got the weapons, he's got the food, he has power, and he's making all of these promises, and he's a really bad guy. I'm not gonna say what he does, but he's a really bad guy. Then you have Mother Abigail. She represents good, and she is trying to rebuild a society that is based on morality and peace. If everything was wiped away, which one would you want to start with? Of course, you go towards Mother Abigail. Everybody loves Miss Abigail. People across the country traveling. You know how it is if you've seen The Walking Dead. You know that there's people that are kind of like scavengers and things like that. You've got some really crazy people. There's just so much about the book. I mean, this is 1,300 pages, I think. So you really start to feel for all these characters and all these moral dilemmas that they go through, all these physical dilemmas that they go through. It's absolutely insane. And it is the definition of a book about survival and morality and the nature of good versus evil. Stephen King really does talk about the collapse of civilization and where to even begin. You have complete strangers that are trying to rebuild a society so things can function again. How could you even fathom that? Of course, this is going to be a huge book. Stephen King does not like to miss details, okay? It talks about fragility of human civilization, and it's just very philosophical. What would you do in this situation? How would you do it differently? Betrayals, hope. Yep. So, crazy ending, okay? I will say, I was not expecting that. My dad actually read this book a long time ago. I was actually able to talk to him about this. As soon as I finished the book, I called him and I said, WTF? Like, what just happened? He's like, yeah, I thought that was the craziest thing too. I'm giving The Stand a 4 out of 5. I really did enjoy it. I'll probably read it again someday, just not right now. It was a Stephen King year for me. And I don't know if I'm really happy or sad about that. Next book that I read this year, I don't have it physical, but I really did enjoy it. It's by Nicholas Sparks. It is The Notebook. Everybody knows The Notebook. It's an amazing movie, okay? It is such a sweet book. I would just say it is a perfect love story. It takes place in the early 1940s between a guy named Noah and a girl named Allie. They come from completely different social backgrounds, but despite that, they fall in love. They have a passionate connection and they can never forget about each other. The book is like the movie. It will go back and forth from the past and present. No sort of conflict that's happening like it is in the movie. They're not yelling and screaming at each other, and they might have some disagreements, but Noah really loved Allie and Allie really loved Noah. It is just taking your heart and just pouring it onto pages. It's just a sweet little prince and princess story, you know, but more in the reality sort of terms. Of course, The Notebook is a 5 out of 5. It was so sweet. Hold on, I got a hangnail. Anyway, next book that I read, another Stephen King, can you believe it? The Green Mile. And yes, I do have the full book, and you might see some of the book actually broken up into little books. There's actually a reason for that, and I feel like you should really look it up on why Stephen King broke down The Green Mile into several different little books. The Green Mile, never seen the movie, just know that's a really good movie and a lot of people cry. So I have The Notebook that a lot of people cry, and then I have The Green Mile that a lot of people cry. I'm a masochist, I guess. The Green Mile is a fictional drama written by Stephen King, and it takes place in the 1930s, Cold Mountain Penitentiary in Louisiana, where a death row inmate awaits execution. The story is narrated by this guy named Paul. He's a former prison guard who kind of recounts his time while working at the penitentiary. The reason why it's called the Green Mile is because there was a stretch of green tile that everybody had to walk on before they were executed by an electric chair. You get to meet 3 very interesting characters while Paul is working at the prison. If you've watched the movie, John Coffey is a large African-American man who was caught holding 2 white little girls and they were dead. So they drawn to conclusion that John Coffey, you have murdered these people. But John Coffey, he's not all the way there. Or maybe he was just so innocent that he didn't understand why someone would go out of their way and kill these 2 beautiful little girls. He really couldn't wrap his head around that. This is also something I was not expecting in this book. John Coffey actually possesses some like supernatural healing abilities. Paul and everybody at the jail kind of gets to see this firsthand. On with this story, Paul really gets to know John Coffey. He truly does not think that John could murder these 2 little girls, and everybody at the prison, they also agree. They also see that John Coffey has this miracle power of almost bringing things back from the dead or almost from the dead. For example, Mr. Jingles, this little mouse, whenever Percy goes to kill the mouse, he severely injures Mr. Jingles, and John Coffey brings Mr. Jingles back to life, and they all see this and they almost seem like they're going insane, but no, truly, John Coffey has this supernatural power from the God he believes in. Paul goes out, gets more information about who else could have really hurt these little girls. Coffey's fate was already written in the books in the legal system. They weren't gonna let this large black man get away with something like this. He was literally caught with them in his hands. So I feel like 1930s, people would have been really upset that he would have lived. Paul and the guards have to deal with this moral dilemma, knowing that this is an innocent man, but that's just how the legal system was, that he was only given so many days and that was his fate. The ruling was set, he was guilty, and there's no going back on that. So the novel really gets to talk about morality, justice, what does it mean for like redemption, of course, like the supernatural. It deals with the humanity of the prisoners. There's so many different types of prisoners that come in. Yes, they're on death row, and you get to find out what they did. If you believe in the death sentence or if you don't believe in the death sentence, this really does bring that moral dilemma up. So this book really does talk about the complexities of life and death and the capacity of cruelty and kindness. It was a really good book. I enjoyed it. The Green Mile. 4 out of 5. This is my second to last book. It is also written by Nicholas Sparks. It is Safe Haven. This is the book that I read when I was in middle school. I did a reading fair project on it. It is a romance slice of life. It's not as romantic as The Notebook, but it is still romantic. Again, by Nicholas Sparks. I think he writes amazing romance novels. Love Nicholas Sparks. It is a thriller in a way. It takes place in a small town on a beach in North Carolina. Kind of follows this character by the name of Katie, who was in an abusive relationship and she's trying to get away from that. She runs away, changes her name, and that's her name is now Katie. She works at this restaurant. There's this other young man by the name of Alex. He has a daughter and he lost his wife to cancer. So he is a single dad with a daughter, and Katie is starting a whole new life trying to run away from her abusive ex-husband. Trigger warning if you can't read things of physical abuse, emotional abuse. I don't recommend reading this book, but Nicholas Sparks really did a good job on painting the horrors that some women, and it's a lot more women than you think, how many domestic violence cases are here just in the United States, and what some people have to go through. What Katie had to go through, it was terrible. But they start falling for each other, but of course Katie's kind of lying to Alex about who she is. She's on the run, crazy ex-husband. It flashes back and forth to her old life and now her current life that she has with Alex and this daughter, and her moral dilemma of, should I really involve them? Should I just keep pushing them away? Do I deserve happiness? I took a vow with God saying that I would love this man forever, but he hits me and he will kill me. He is an alcoholic. He is a terrible person. If you enjoy romance and a thrilling kind of moment, this is a great book. So of course, Safe Haven is gonna get a 5 out of 5 for me. I will tell you guys my book of the year of 2024. And that is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, the definitive edition. Yes, this is not a very complex book like The Stand, and it doesn't have to be a great book. It is a historical nonfiction. I think a majority of people know who Anne Frank is. It's written in the point of view of Anne Frank. It starts out before they have to go into hiding. These are little diary entries, and it is written between the dates of 1942 and 1944. You really do get a candid look into thoughts and feelings and the experiences that she navigates through the harsh realities of living and hiding and what that really means. I didn't realize she is a really funny little girl, but she was a very optimistic and very beautiful soul. If you've seen my previous year, I do read a lot about World War II, the Holocaust, things like that. And so I wanted another perspective from World War II, and I really enjoyed getting to know Anne Frank. Pretty much throughout her time in hiding, she documents the challenges of living in the constant fear of being discovered, food rations, having to deal with like relationships. Could you imagine being stuck in a little old place with several other people? These people that you're having to be stuck with, you'd kind of go insane, and relationships change, and what hiding really does do to you. So, I mean, God, physiologically, emotionally, physically, I just can't imagine. And in 1944, Anne and her family and the others are arrested. At the end of the book, it tells you what actually happens to Anne and where her and her sister go. They get separated from their parents and they end up in Auschwitz, and then they go to Bergen-Belsen, and that's where Anne dies of the typhus fever in 1945. Just before the camp's liberation, which is horrible. Also, the reason why I say definitive edition is because there's different editions of The Diary of a Young Girl. In the earlier versions of the diary, some parts were censored and removed before publication because they didn't want any explicit content or any references to Anne's developing sexuality. I don't feel like it is inappropriate in any way. It is just raw emotions. That's another dilemma that she was going through, or another challenge that she was going through. Yes, I will say, Anne did start the diary out as just a diary. Nobody else would see it. But then as she was writing, she felt like, oh, after I get out of here, I'll be able to publish this. A young girl facing absolutely unimaginable hardships, but being so positive and so innocent. Oh, my heart hurts so much, but beautiful book, 5 out of 5. I've had a wonderful 2024, a very difficult 2024, a very exciting 2024, and I cannot wait till 2025. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next year. Bye-bye.